Imagine just for a second a ruler who can make literally any rule they want, enforce it however they please, and then personally judge anyone who disagrees. No one to stop them. Sounds like a recipe for a total dictatorship, right? Well, welcome to this explainer on institutions and public policy. I'm your host, and today we're diving straight into the actual machinery of American democracy. A system built specifically to make sure that kind of absolute power never, ever happens here. Our core claim today is kind of fascinating. The U.S. Constitution intentionally divides power so that absolutely no single institution can control public policy without the cooperation of the others. We're going to look at exactly how the founders designed this giant puzzle to force collaboration and completely prevent tyranny.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. Separating the powers. 2. Congress makes the laws. 3. The president takes action. 4. Courts guard the Constitution. 5. Checking and balancing power. And 6. Recap and transfer. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1. Separating the powers. To really wrap our heads around public policy in the U.S., we first have to understand the fundamental architecture of the government. The framers of the Constitution had just fought this grueling war against the king who had way too much concentrated authority. They were deeply, deeply concerned about giving too much power to any one person or group in this brand new nation. So, to prevent this, they split up power in two major ways. The really crucial point here is that power within the federal government is divided independently into three distinct branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. What this means is that the power to make laws, enforce laws, and interpret laws doesn't live in the same building or with the exact same people. It's a structural safeguard, essentially, against absolute rule.
But, the founders didn't just stop there. Beyond dividing the federal government into three branches, power is also split between the national government as a whole and the individual state governments. Think about your school for a second. You have a principal who oversees the huge, big-picture stuff and sets policies for the whole building, right? But then, your individual teachers run their own distinct classrooms and set their own daily rules. Well, federalism works a lot like that. We have a national government for massive, countrywide responsibilities, like funding the military, and state governments for local things, like setting the driving age or funding local schools. So it creates two separate levels of government, each with the capacity to act directly on behalf of the people.
And this really brilliantly illustrates the difference between these two vital concepts. Think of this separation of powers as a horizontal division. It's spreading authority straight across the three equal branches at the national level. Federalism, on the other hand, is a vertical division of authority, splitting responsibilities up and down between the national government and the states. Both of these structures ensure that power is never dangerously concentrated in one single place.
Moving right along, Section 2. Congress makes the laws. Let's see how all of this builds, starting with the first part of that horizontal division, the legislative branch. This is established right off the bat in Article 1 of the Constitution. Article 1 grants Congress specific enumerated powers to create legislation. We're talking about the power to tax, borrow money, and regulate interstate commerce. But it also includes something super interesting called the Necessary and Proper Clause, which is often referred to as the Elastic Clause. Why elastic? Well, because it stretches. The founders obviously couldn't have predicted things like airplanes, the internet, or space travel, but because of this clause, Congress has the flexible authority to create the legal means necessary to fulfill its constitutional responsibilities, even today in the modern world. Oh, and Congress is also designed as a bicameral system, meaning it's split into two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Okay, let's take a quick pause check to see if we really understand the design of this branch. Why did the framers purposely divide the lawmakers themselves into two separate houses? Take just a second to think about it.
If you guessed it was to settle a massive, heated argument, you hit the nail on the head. Creating a bicameral Congress was the great compromise. And listen, this wasn't just a mild disagreement. It was an intense clash at the Constitutional Convention that almost tore the country apart before it even got started. The House of Representatives represents populations, which made the larger states really happy because they wanted more say. Meanwhile, the Senate ensures equal representation, literally 2 senators for every single state, which protected the smaller states from just being bullied. It's a system that perfectly balances regional and national interests in lawmaking.
All right, Section 3, the president takes action.
Next up, we examine the executive branch, established by Article 2 of the Constitution. So while Congress makes the laws, this branch is designed to actually put them into action. Article 2 outlines the offices of the president and vice president, establishing their really unique election process through the Electoral College. The core function of the president is to assume executive power to enforce the laws passed by Congress. Now, because the country is so massive, the president is assisted by a vast network of executive agencies. To put that into perspective for you, when Congress passes a law to keep our drinking water clean, the president doesn't personally put on a lab coat and go out to test the water, right? Instead, they rely on agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency to do the actual on-the-ground work of administering those public services.
Now, the president doesn't always have to sit around waiting for Congress to pass a new bill to get things moving. An executive order is a directive issued by the president that manages operations of the federal government. And get this, it actually has the force of law. This is a super powerful tool that allows the executive branch to swiftly implement policy within its constitutional limits, completely bypassing the sometimes slow legislative process.
Let's turn to Section 4, Courts Guard the Constitution. Time to bring in the third piece of our horizontal puzzle laid out in Article 3, the judicial branch. Now, this branch looks quite a bit different from the other two. For starters, its members aren't elected by the people, and they rely heavily on historical precedent and lifetime tenure. Why lifetime tenure, you ask? Well, it's so they can make fair decisions based entirely on the law, without constantly worrying about being unpopular or losing their next election. The federal court system is structured in three main tiers. You've got district courts, appellate courts, and finally, the U.S. Supreme Court at the very top. These courts act as the final arbiters of the law, resolving really complex conflicts between different levels of government and ensuring that your individual constitutional rights are protected against any government overreach.
And the absolute most profound tool the courts possess is judicial review. This power allows the federal courts to review the actions of both the national and state governments to determine if they actually align with the Constitution. It's basically like thinking of the Supreme Court as the ultimate referee in a really high-stakes game. If Congress or the president steps out of bounds and breaks the rules of the Constitution, the court blows the whistle, throws a flag using judicial review, and strikes down that public policy.
Now, for Section 5, Checking and Balancing Power.
So now that we've introduced all three of our distinct branches, let's look at how they actually interact. Because remember, our core claim for this explainer is that they cannot control policy alone. They literally must work together. And this brings us to checks and balances. The Constitution intentionally intertwined the powers of the three branches. It's honestly a lot like a giant, high-stakes game of rock, paper, scissors. Every single branch has a specific tool to stop or check the other two. This guarantees that no single entity can achieve absolute authority over the nation's public policy. It flat out forces cooperation.
Let's look at this sequence through a real-world lens. Imagine Congress passes a law making the menus for school lunches a national federal policy. First, the lawmakers in Congress have to debate, draft, and actually pass that legislation. Second, the executive branch gets involved. The president must either sign the school lunch bill into law or officially reject it with a veto. Third, even if it becomes law and starts changing cafeterias nationwide, the judiciary can review it if a citizen or a state challenges its constitutionality. Every single branch has a hand on the steering wheel. So let's do our second pause check. Imagine this high-drama scenario. Congress passes that school lunch bill, but the president absolutely hates it. They slam their pen down, use their power to veto it, and throw the whole thing out. Is that law completely dead forever? Well, the answer is no. Because of checks and balances, the legislative branch has a built-in constitutional mechanism to push back. Congress can override a presidential veto. If they hold a new vote and a supermajority, which is 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, agrees to pass it, it becomes law despite the president's objections. Now, let me tell you, it is incredibly difficult to get a 2/3 supermajority. It basically shows that overriding a president requires massive, overwhelming bipartisan agreement, but it is a truly perfect example of shared power in action.
And finally, Section 6, Recap and Transfer. We've explored the intricate machinery of our democracy today, from the halls of Congress to the Oval Office, all the way to the Supreme Court. So let's lock in our core claim by looking at the evidence we've gathered. Our claim was that the Constitution prevents any single institution from dominating public policy. And the evidence is super clear on this. Power is systematically separated horizontally across the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. It's also shared vertically between the federal government and the states through federalism. And finally, a really strict system of checks and balances forces these branches into a cooperative, sometimes combative, but always interdependent relationship. Literally, no one acts entirely alone. I'm going to leave you with this transfer question to think about how these interconnected institutions handle real-world conflicts today. If a state creates a law that directly clashes with a brand new federal policy passed by Congress, how do you think the different branches and those rules of federalism we talked about would step in to solve that puzzle? It's something that happens all the time in our dynamic republic. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning how our institutions shape the policies that impact our daily lives.